Good morning and welcome to the meeting of the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. My name is Councillor John Taylor and I'm Chairman of the committee. I'm going to start by asking the members of the committee to just briefly introduce themselves. Kath, if you wouldn't mind.
Councillor Kath Bennett from Kirklees.
Chris Jones, independent member.
Councillor James Homer from Ashbrow Ward.
Councillor Angela Sewell, Gurkha Ward.
Councillor Caroline Holt, Liversedge and Gomersall.
Thank you very much. We have a number of officers with us and I'll ask the officers to introduce themselves when they come in to present their items. First item is if we've received any apologies.
Apologies received from Councillor Taylor Hall, please.
Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting, these have been circulated with the papers. Are colleagues content with the content of the minutes? Okay, thank you very much. Declarations of interest. If members have any items on the agenda which they have an interest, please can you either declare it now or when we get to the item. If you do make a declaration, can you please fill in the forms contained in the papers and provide it at the end of the meeting. Thank you. Admission of the public. The majority of items are going to be taken in public. At the end of the meeting, we will have a private session to discuss some aspects of the internal audit report, but otherwise matters are being taken in public. Deputation and petitions?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Public question time?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. That moves us nicely on to agenda item 7, Corporate Customer Standards Annual Report, and I'll invite Chris to introduce this item.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm Chris Reid, Corporate Customer Standards Officer for the Council. First of all, apologies for the annual report being a little bit late. It's usually more usual for me to report it in September, October time, so it is a little bit late. It's not been designed that way, just the way, unfortunately, sometimes workloads happen, so apologies to everyone for that. One advantage is that I was able to report and pass some comment on 24-25, which is interesting because we have received an increase in the number of complaints, so I can comment on that. First of all, 23-24, it's been a steady year in many ways. We've had no formal report from the Local Government Ombudsman for the 6th year running. We did have an increase in complaint numbers, but no significant increase in the number of complaints upheld. Year on year, we're in a similar position against West Yorkshire. We get fewer Ombudsman complaints than we might expect when you actually work out the population for West Yorkshire, and I've also done an analysis against Manchester and South Yorkshire, which sort of showed the same as well, really. The report has a few learning examples in it, but I tend to put more of the learning examples in for the interim report, so I come to Corporate Governance and Audit twice a year, and I tend to put in a lot more of the learning examples in the interim report, but there are a few in there. For 24-25, there's more complaints coming through, as I said right at the beginning, but we're holding steady again with the number of complaints that have been upheld, and our proportion of complaints in West Yorkshire at the Ombudsman again is lower than we might anticipate per population, so it's pretty much a holding steady state overall, really. Moving forward, the Ombudsman Code is being introduced in April 2026. That will give us some increased consistency because every council across the country will be working to a similar complaints code. So that means that we can compare a little better at third stage rather than just at Ombudsman. And third stage will be called second stage at that stage because we're reducing the number of complaint stages. So there'll be more comparisons available as we move forward. And the code also requires us to record more at service stage. So again, there will be more information that we'll be able to report on in forthcoming years. I very much focus on the final stage complaints in this report, but we should get more information from services across the way. About a week and a half ago, the Ombudsman published its guidance for councils to introduce the code, so I can crack on. So we'll be working on that in the next few months. So, yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. I'll open it now to members' questions. Kath.
Thanks, Chris, very much. One of the comments I want to make is, and it may change when the new code is introduced, is that we don't see, it's more difficult to see the whole picture when, like, children's have a separate complaint process, for instance. And I just wonder whether under the new code that will all be brought under one umbrella, so that as councillors we can see the totality of complaints and type and so on in one place, because I think that is helpful for us to understand what's going on. Second thing is, I mean, you do say in the report, we are not going to be, I can't remember your words, so believe that the lower number of complaints equals success. You haven't put it quite like that, but I do always get a bit concerned if a complaint in any organisation are low. That may not be a positive figure to think about. Low, if the complaints are too low, it may mean that our processes aren't right, or people have just given up on the ability of getting a successful outcome to their complaint. So, that'd be worth just hearing your perspective on that. Then two other smaller ones, really. The housing stuff. I mean, I just know from local experience that, tenants getting in touch saying, this isn't right, this hasn't happened. A lot of that is reflected in the report about timeliness, information, etc. So, but it does seem to me, I always think if I have two or more complaints in the same sort of time period about a particular issue, that it's probably quite big in the council, and so I would worry about that. And lastly, the whistleblowing stuff. And perhaps I didn't read it right, because I've read it quite quickly, but am I right that the whistleblowing report, it says goes to scrutiny? Does it say that? Have I read that wrongly? I did read it very quickly. Or to scrutiny. Yeah, bottom of page 11. So why is it one or the other? Because again, it doesn't matter which really, but a committee of the council needs to see the totality of what's going on. And I don't know why it's one or the other. So that's, sorry, a list of questions there for you, Chris.
Thanks, Kath.
Lovely, thank you very much. Hopefully I'll remember them all. Unfortunately, the children's complaints process is subject to the Children's Act. So it's a statutory complaints process, and actually the review process goes external. So the second stage of the complaints process sort of like is an external independent stage. And likewise, the Housing Ombudsman looks at housing complaints, so they have a separate process, although the Local Government Ombudsman and the Housing Ombudsman are looking to align what they do very much more closely. The difference is that the Housing Ombudsman is set up under a different statute, and they have greater powers than local government ombudsmen, so the code can't be exactly the same, because there's some must-dos and we are should-dos in the sort of statutory complaints process, the corporate complaints process. So it does get quite confusing. So we do always end up with lots of different little complaints processes and twists and turns. And of course, the other thing is that a lot of things that we deal with actually have formal appeals processes as well. So, for example, special educational needs has a formal appeals process. Well, they are complaints in all but name, but they go through the appeals process, and again, they fall out of this process. So it does get very, very complicated. And I do always counsel people not to sort of tally up all the complaints and come to a great figure and then decide that that was good or bad and better than last year and worse than last year, because there are so many conflicting things that impact upon it. You're only counting a partial count of things, so it's really quite difficult to sort of pick up too much from the complaints numbers. So I always do sort of counsel a bit of caution on that. In terms of complaint numbers, yeah, it's always a thorny issue, unfortunately. What we try and do is we try and instill on everybody that if they're not happy with stuff, how to progress their complaint and their concerns. So at first stage, we always signpost to second stage. At second stage, we signpost to third, and then on to Ombudsman. And of course, it's the same for every council, really. Everybody has the same process that they go through. So hopefully we can pick up a bit of consistency across the piece by comparing ourselves with some of the other councils. I think the other thing to think about with local government ombudsman, I actually look at some of the criticism the local government ombudsman gets, and quite often it's because people want what they want, and they don't always realise that we're so closely managed by legislation, and our requirements and what we do for people is really set quite hard and fast, and that people just don't understand why we can't just sort of make that a green man sort of bleep for 5 seconds longer because I can't get across the road. They don't realise that it's all set by legislation, and the timings really are quite specific. So we are sometimes limited what we do, and the complaints process doesn't really address them, because I check to see whether they've done things in terms of legislation and not really what people have asked for, which might be, rather random, I suppose, because they don't appreciate all the legislation that sits behind it. In terms of housing, yeah, I think the housing service do recognise that they've got a lot of learning to do, a lot of improvement to do, and I think that comes through in their report. I think the other interesting thing is that the Housing Ombudsman has also changed tack a little bit. So they're also finding their way in terms of what they might expect, or how they might expect the Housing Ombudsman to respond as well. So that's an extra complexion, I suppose, in their sort of complaints process. But so hopefully in the next year or two, I think we might get again to a consistency where we can actually sort of measure, because complaints, I think, in Housing Ombudsman terms have gone up, but it would do just purely because of the way the Housing Ombudsman works. So it's kind of quite difficult at the moment to sort of look at trends and that sort of stuff. And my colleague Martin very kindly said that he would cover the last bit, which was I'm very pleased about, because I don't know the answer to that one, so thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's Martin Durnley, Head of Risk. So I think the point about the last paragraph there is that actually it says the issues may be related to the corporate government, referred to the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee or scrutiny for their consideration. That's the issues once they've been investigated. So, some things will be taken forward as internal audits and will be therefore reported as part of the internal audit process. Or if something had arisen that was a sort of policy type thing, that might go through scrutiny. The bulk of things that whistleblower really tend to be grievances, in which case we sort of tend to throw them back and say they're a grievance, or things that are of a nature of a complaint that would be investigated by internal audit, such as a sort of inappropriate behaviour or actions by others, and those will be reported through that process. So that's the reason why that's written that way. And just as an aside, if I can add in, Chris, that we're also taking over, we've taken over the staff who look after complaints in children's services as well. So we will be able to bring a bit more holisticness to that part. So there'll be, and we also should remember that, of course, most children's complaints actually go through the Ombudsman, because they are about getting beyond the stage that Chris referred to as the appeal stage, and other things that people don't like in the way children's services. The children's services specialist work is quite limited to sort of things related to care, and that's why it goes to outside investigators, essentially. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, come back.
Thanks very much for those replies. And again, in my experience, Chris, your team does a good job in responding in the way you do to complaints. I still think we ought to, as a council, see an overview somewhere, be it here or somewhere else, scrutiny management or something, ought to be able to see the overview of all the complaints procedures and numbers and so on, because otherwise you just don't get a feel of whether things, because that's your first early warning sign, isn't it, when things are not going perhaps as well as they should. So I think I've asked this question in previous years. But apart from that, I think thanks very much for what your team does.
Thank you very much. I mean, what I would say is that at third stage, our learning examples tend to be, and I hesitate to use this word, but I can't think of a better one, quite boring, in that they are fairly standard and routine, which suggests to me that, say, for example, there was an issue at a particular tip or something like that, you know, in terms of they hadn't publicised the opening times or something like that correctly. They don't reach me, so they are actually addressed within service. So you do pick up the sort of... but you do get some sort of assurance in terms of actually the managers in service do tend to pick up stuff while it's still with them. And, you know, it's quite rare for me to pick up some sort of glaring legislation error or something like that at third stage. So it does give some confidence. And obviously, as the Ombudsman Code comes in, I would hope that we can draw in service complaints into the sort of corporate, you know, have better corporate oversight of those. So I think we will pick up quite a lot of what you're talking about, to be fair. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Just before I bring James in, just an observation around complaints. I've always viewed complaints as being valuable because they shine a light on areas where perhaps things aren't going quite so well. So I was just wondering, whilst it's difficult to bring that whole holistic picture together of every complaint that we receive, what is the involvement in the cabinet members in terms of what sort of briefing do they get on the complaints within their portfolio? Because really that's perhaps a way of perhaps dealing with it if you can't do it in a holistic way. And I just wonder if there are any, how that's dealt with. So then I'll bring James in.
I mean, I do get examples where if it's sort of like an important complaint or some sort of learning that is to be done, they do share with the services, share with cabinet members as part of the sort of regular briefing and updates that they have. I don't have huge involvement with it. In terms that I might feed back on something and then that is added to an addendum to, you know, for the briefing for the cabinet members. But so I think that's how the process works in the main.
Thanks, Chris. Unfortunately, Councillor Hawkins isn't with us today. I'll pick up with Councillor Hawkins to try and find out what cabinet members do get. Because I think even level 1 and level 2 complaints, I think it's important that the cabinet members have visibility of that, even if it's not holistically across the whole of the organisation. But I'll bring James in now.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so on this first point about complaints and use of data, I suppose what I'm still not sure on is what we consider a first stage complaint. So, for example, if someone rang up and said, you didn't collect my bins, I would say that's a complaint, but I'm not sure we'd consider that a stage 1 complaint. But that data could be quite helpful in understanding where we have problems, and we may already use that sort of data to go, there's a problem because we're suddenly got an increase in reports of bin collections or potholes or whatever. But I'm not sure exactly how we categorise those things. So I think once you get into the pot of being a first stage complaint, then you get all these notifications, you can go to the Ombudsman and so on. And I'm sure the most serious cases go through that process. But I do also imagine there's a lot of people who contact the council and get told this is the position. They're probably complaining about something, but I'm not sure that they necessarily get into that complaint process, and I don't know where that exactly lies. And the other thing I was just going to ask him, on some of the complaints, there's the summaries and in the appendix, there's quite a lot of, and I don't know if this is just the way that it's laid out, it's quite like, there's not, on a lot of them, there's not a kind of thing of we resolved this person's case. They're more like, we apologise for doing something wrong and gave them some payment. And I was and that might be because in a lot of those cases, the issue's now already been resolved and they're complaining about something that happened in the past, but I'm just interested how we resolve the cases. And also on the payments, I was a bit unsure what we meant, because we referred to a symbolic payment. Wasn't sure what that meant exactly. And also I wasn't sure does that only happen at stage 3? So, or if you're at stage 2 or stage 1, and we said, yeah, you're right, we're at fault here, would we give people inconvenience payments or distress payments or symbolic payments or whatever they're referred to? Because I'm just wondering if a reason to refer your case would be to get payment.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll cover the second one first. I think we do try and offer payments to people as if the Ombudsman, if we find an error, we do try and sort of make a payment which is commensurate with how the Ombudsman might offer it. So from a restorative point of view, we don't make people jump through the hoops to get to the Ombudsman. We would actually sort of try and make sure that we'll just resolve it in the way that the Ombudsman might. So if we know that there's a delay or something, and I suppose special educational needs is quite a clear-cut one, because there is delay in terms of people making assessments and getting their statements sorted out and that sort of stuff. Well, the Ombudsman has a national sort of figure that they would apply. So if we are in that same boat, then we would look to sort of remedy it in the same way. In terms of the actual appendices, I've actually just copied word for word the Ombudsman's conclusions. I felt that was the safest thing to do. I didn't want to be accused of manipulating or changing something that an independent body had written or put. So the wording that you see in there is exactly what they've written. In terms of actually remedying things, yes, we would look to remedy the situation if we possibly can. And of course, don't forget there's quite a time lag quite often between the complaint coming through, we getting to it at third stage, and then it moving on to local government ombudsman and then making a decision. It could, in very extreme cases, be 18 months later on. So in many cases, the actual issue that they raised has been addressed one way or the other. They've either got the service they want or they haven't got the service they want, and they've been told why they haven't got the service. So that sort of side of it has been addressed. The symbolic payments, the Ombudsman sort of doesn't. Everybody's circumstances are different, so what I might incur as a cost in chasing something up might be entirely different to what you incur as, and whether you think it's proportionate to get a solicitor involved or, and I don't, and that sort of stuff. So they basically come up with a small token figure to recognise a symbolic loss, but it's not well, how much have you spent on this and how much time have you spent on this, and also, they don't work it out to the pence. They will actually just produce a sort of symbolic amount, and it is sort of £100, £200, £300. It's that sort of figure that would be offered. But yeah, okay. I'm not sure whether I've answered everything, but
yeah, that's fine. So just to clarify then, because the payment structure and the symbolic thing, that's actually the Ombudsman that are saying that. I just think it's a bit of an unusual phrase because it's not symbolic. It's a recompense for. So if they say, this cost me £100 because I had to get a taxi here, or I had to stay in a hotel overnight because you didn't put me on the homelessness list or something, that actually might be not really symbolic, but I get the point that it might not be a legally binding cost or whatever. It's an agreement between the parties. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Chris?
Yeah, sorry, I would just add to that. Yes, that there may also be additional money spent if it's really clearly identifiable. An example might be, and please don't quote me because I don't think this has happened, but if we take out a council tax payment early and it means somebody moves into arrears and they get charged £18 because they've moved into arrears because we've taken the money out before we said we would, then that £18 would be refunded to them as you've incurred that loss. So the sort of symbolic is on top of an actual cost as well. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the report, Chris, and for the introduction. I kind of share Kath's view, I think, about a desire to see some sort of richer picture of what's happening in some more detail. I mean, the report is titled Customer Standards, and I don't know where we go to find out whether customer standards are being achieved, but complaints is only part of the picture, isn't it? So there might be some other things around customer standards that we could pick up through the internal audit plan or something that says how do we set customer standards and are they being delivered consistently, and where they're not, what does that tell us? I'd love to know a bit more about whistleblowing, in particular how the council promotes the whistleblowing route to employees and whether that's regularly reinforced. I've got no idea whether 14 is a good figure, a bad figure, an average figure, and I guess we never know, do we? But I suppose that all a good employee can do is continually promote whistleblowing routes and make staff aware, so I don't know how we do that, so if you could tell me a bit about that. And on the housing report, What I read was more complaints, fewer being resolved at stage 1 and really slow at dealing with them at stage 2, which when I added to previous reports around district heating and referrals to regulators, I started to think, and this might not be a question for you, Chris, it might be for a different route, what's going on in housing, because it doesn't feel like it's a great picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Customer standards, we are in the process of developing a customer standard. It's going to be a sort of bit of a work in progress, but we're actually working with the customer experience team to have a look at that. So that will sort of develop over time. In terms of the whistleblowing, how we promote it, we did do some work, I think about 18 months ago, where we did sort of try and promote it round and about for staff. In terms of the numbers that we receive, it's usually between 10 and 20, something like that, on an annual basis. So the numbers are kind of quite similar, and it's also part of the induction, and it's also on the website as well, and our intranet as well. In terms of the housing, I think Steve wants to say something about that. And again, I don't particularly work on the housing complaints, so I'm not the best person to comment on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say we're not where we want to be on housing on a range of fronts. Now, not all of that would come back into this committee. Clearly, that goes through scrutiny, through Cabinet. We've even had a discussion at full council on the latest position on the Housing Ombudsman. It's worth remembering that under the housing part that we've self-referred under the old system, which finished in March 24. A new system is in, and we are speaking to the housing regulator about how we get assessed under that model. So for us to step out of intervention with the housing regulator, we'll need to reassure ourselves that on all the customer standards we are adequate, I think is the phrase that they'll use, to step out of that. So we are discussing regularly with a housing regulator, housing ombudsman if you like, where we want to be on that. And I think we know, obviously we've got issues on damp and mould that we've been talking about to our customers, and making sure that not only are the council adhering to the right process, but the customers know that we're adhering to the right processes. And I can cite some examples where we've not done that. You know, we've gone to fix a cause, or we've gone to examine a cause rather, and actually the customer thought we were going to fix it, and we've not done as good enough job as we wanted to be able to do. We are getting better at that. Some things are not overnight. Some things are inherent in the different archetypes we've got for those housing activities that are going to take quite some time to sort out. But the customer should not be left in the lurch, or the tenant rather, should not be left in the lurch confused about what those positions are, and that's definitely a source of improvement that we've been working on. We have both an independent chair and board that look at the housing improvement stuff, and we bring regular updates back to Cabinet on those activities, and those, if scrutiny wish, they get a more detailed debate on those housing improvement stuff as well. So we are doing a lot of front on the housing stuff. But I think the other issue on housing as well is the waiting list and how much of it, the lack of it, if you like, the temporary accommodation issue and all the rest of it. So we've got to kind of recognise those parts. And 22,000 properties that we've got, some of which are very ailing and need more repairs and more maintenance and all that kind of stuff. The balance between repairs and maintenance, John, you know this, we've talked about this on several occasions, the balance between repairs and maintenance and big capital works and programmes is challenging, whilst an HRA that is not very well funded and needs a lot of more resource in that kind of stuff, but is ring-fenced. So the council can't just throw loads of money at it, because you've got to pay for it with inside the HRA. So it's a difficult situation, not just in Kirklees, I would hasten to add. That's not, the difficult in housing stock is not just a Kirklees issue. What we want to make sure we focus on is that our tenants are well versed on what we're trying to do, both individually and collectively. And we're working with tenants and residents associations to try and do better on that. We're not there yet. I wouldn't want to sit here and say to everybody that we are better fixed, but we're working on all those improvements. Thanks.
Okay, Chris. I would just add to that as well. We have tenants involved at every stage. So, the Housing Improvement Board, we have tenant representatives sat on that. We have a tenants board as well, tenants' voice to make sure that they have the ability to feed in, and everything that the housing service tries to do these days, we will walk through with that tenant group to make sure that we're trying to address any, sort of any possible misunderstandings or poor communications that might result as a result of that. But as Steve says, it's going to take time to turn it around. There's a lot of openness about it.
I suppose I was just putting together some pieces of a jigsaw that we've seen in the committee, but to go back to Kath's point, that deteriorating position on complaints says something about something that's going on in that function, and I accept everything you said, and I'm not disputing that, but we've got this report, haven't we, and it says things are getting worse, not better, so let's hope that things will start to turn around. As you say, it's a long term.
And I would share colleagues' comments that sometimes, and you've got to analyse the type of complaint you're getting on some things, and sometimes it's a service demand change, so missed bins aren't always a complaint straight away. It might be that actually we know that we went past the end of that street. You might have complained that you didn't come past. We've got the data on the vans that say you did. Is it a service change? And the difficulty that Chris has on a lot of stuff is that a complaint to one service is not the same as it is to another service. And so I absolutely agree with consistency of what complaints are across councils, not just this council, is going to be really useful. So we'll be able to do that. On the whole, we compare pretty well, and not just about the number of complaints, but the actual resolution of those complaints, so we don't get ombudsman filed against us stuff. I was interested because I was reflecting on last year's meeting, and of course I've been here longer than a year now, so we got a bit of a kick in last year because our complaints had gone down, which was a bit disappointing. But our complaints look like they've gone up in 24, 25. So I'm hoping that is seen as success, that we are now being able to register those issues. With all seriousness though, we do look at the complaints, and scrutiny can look at those complaints on a service by service request kind of stuff. I will take that away to discuss how we do that on a more consistent basis across the council. It's not easy though, I would say. It's because there are lots of customer engagement differences depending on which service you're in, and as Chris says, some of those are also governed by statute alone. Thank you.
Okay, so just one other observation from me. Under 6.4 it talks about service changes to residents, and I think there is something here for us, and I think we'll all recognise that fast reviews of service provision, we kind of missed the residents and the consumers of those services sometimes out of the discussion. I think there's certainly some stuff that I think we all know the examples we're probably talking about where we just plainly got it wrong. It's good to see, Chris, that it's in here as one of the learnings. But I just hope the services, because we are still going through an awful lot of service reviews, we just need to make sure that we think about residents in that, and it quite often missed because there's a hurry to get through to a decision because there's a financial impact. But I'll just make that as an observation, really, rather than necessarily somebody commenting on. Just look at members. Do we have any more questions or comments? James?
Just really quickly, it was just to pick on the fact that I think, and this is maybe where I was getting to the point on about how we use the data and things, I think a complaint is when somebody complains about something. That doesn't mean that what they're saying is justified necessarily or legally. So, for example, if someone complains that they didn't get the bin collected, and we come back and say, oh, well, it was because somebody parked a lorry across the road, they've still complained, and that's still a valid complaint. If somebody complains and says, my street needs resurfacing, we might have a valid argument to go and say, well, actually, it's not the priority street, and it doesn't fall under the definitions of what needs resurfacing. However, it gives us information that tells us what are our residents telling us about the key issues to them. So do you see what I mean? So a complaint isn't just a complaint because we've accepted, yes, there is some fault or liability. And sometimes complaints will be unreasonable, won't they? But it's still good to understand what people are complaining about, because that gives us that view of what our priorities should be as a council and how we should we change our processes. Are we making the right decisions and things? So that's all part of making. I'm not saying that we need to every time someone says something we need to log it on a complaint system or something. But I think it's just about how we utilise the data to the best of our, best we can, basically.
I think that's where I was coming from about what involvement do the cabinet members have and what sight do they have of the, level 1 and level 2 as well as level 3 complaints. Because that's how you'll pick up those themes and those trends about areas that the residents are concerned about, and then that can feed into, policy discussions and prioritisation discussions, can't it? And just on the bins, I mean, we all get it all the time about missed bins and people contact us. And I've had this discussion with the team several times. We're not very good at communicating why the bin was missed or how we communicate that the bin was missed. And it's almost nobody's told anything and we rely on the resident to ring up and complain. And that's got to be the wrong process. But we seem to every time bat it away, and we don't really want to address that issue about how do we let residents know that we were unable to collect their bin because somebody parked the lorry across the road. And, we're supposed to be delivering a service, and we really shouldn't be in a position where we're reliant on residents having to ring us up to try and find out. But I'll just leave that there, I think.
I don't disagree that we have to use the data better. There is a difference of opinion on what is a service change request and what is a complaint. And you could have the two self-same issues. One customer views it as I'm complaining, another views it as customer. I'm not complaining, I just want you to log that I would like that to change. And that is hard. So the definition is quite often gets in the way. Am I that fussed about the difference of definition? No. I just want to make sure that somebody's logged it and has got back to the person. So we have to just make sure that that doesn't get in the way too much. And on the whole, we do pretty well at that lower level stuff. There are complications. It is not possible for us to contact every customer on a bin round when we miss a street. We have no efficient way currently of doing that. We don't have the resource to knock down every road and tell them. We don't have everybody's email address on that street or phone number to let them know. So we have to find a better way. I'm not saying but we have to find a better way to let people know. I would like everybody to be logged with an online account, and we can send them a message that says, the bin was missed on your street this morning, leave it out and we'll come on. But at the moment, we have to put online messages on and wait for people to look at that or contact us or whatever. That's not the most efficient way of doing it. But we do not have the resource and person power to contact every person on that street to let them know, or every member to let them know where stuff is. And quite often, people ring up and say, we've missed a bin, and we haven't. We know we haven't. Quite often, they didn't put their bin out. And we know that. We've got the data in the vans that know that. So again, we have to be able to respond to those in a more efficient manner. Most of you know that we've been doing a piece on customer expectation, and we will be doing more on that throughout the summer, working with residents, as Councillor Taylor said, to make sure people understand what they can expect. And we won't be able to do it for every service, but it will be the big major interactions that the council get, bins and potholes and all the major stuff that we get interactions on. Actually spelling out better what we can expect, where to go when it doesn't go right, what to do when it doesn't happen to the standard you expect, and making it easier to be able to register your service change, view, complaint, whatever it may be, about that in a more digital fashion, because that is the only way, from an efficiency perspective, we're going to be able to deal with the high level of transactional contacts that we get. We won't be able to manage that on the phones going forward. We won't be able to manage that in person going forward. The digital bit has to take out the bulk of the interaction that we're going to have for our customers in the right way, with the right information. And it's no good registering a complaint and then nobody does anything with it. There's got to be an interaction that can track that stuff as well. And we've got to be able to use our technology in a better way to be able to do that.
Thanks, Steve. I'm going to...
Very quickly, because what you've just said, Steve, is when there are big, significant issues of bins or whatever, what would be really helpful is if local members could be told. Because the first people that, in our ward anyway, I don't know about others, contact, if their bin is missed, is us. And we have to go, oh, don't know, I'll have to find out. And if we had an email saying, couldn't get down Howard Park because of all the cars parked there, then I'd be able to tell them and try and resolve the issue. I just do not understand why that can't happen and why members are frequently left out of the loop in information. It drives me to distraction. We are going to mend your road. How? When? Who? Why? No. Important information like that? No.
Right. I'm not going to ask for comments on that because we never get through the meeting at this rate. But it is a point that we should take through scrutiny, really. And I think that would in fact, I think I sit on the scrutiny committee that I'd come to, so I can raise that for you, Kath. But I think there is a point about, bins comes to environment and climate. Yeah.
Members are the interface.
I want to move on.
We need to have information.
I want to move on. Sorry, Kath. Right. So I think, Alice, are you going to introduce the next one?
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, sorry. 1 second. I forgot to just check with the members that we were happy to approve the Corporate Standards Annual Report. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Alice Carruthers, Risk Officer for the Council, and this is the annual report of risk management. The report just sets out in high level the process that exists council-wide for identifying, monitoring and mitigating risks, so across the organisation. The requirements and responsibilities are outlined in the risk management policy, and further guidance is within the risk management strategy and guidance document, and both of these documents were approved by this committee in 2024. Service directors and heads of service manage their risks through standardised risk register templates, so they review and update on a quarterly basis as a minimum. We encourage officers to operate kind of their discretion in terms of that review frequency, and it might be that they choose to review their high-rated risk with a greater frequency on a monthly basis, for instance, but as a minimum, it's a quarterly review that we require. Risk registers are collated centrally, so we undertake a degree of moderation in terms of scoring, but importantly, we identify dependencies, thematic trends, and items that may require escalation to the corporate risk report. So risks of sufficient magnitude are escalated to the corporate risk report, which is then reported to ELT and onwards to Executive Board and to Cabinet. In the paper, page 4 just shows in a tabular format a high-level view of the risk profile, demonstrating the breadth and coverage of the corporate risks that are currently being reported and the scores that are attributed to them, and this was at the end of quarter 3. We highlight within the report improvements that have been made during the last 12 months as part of our journey to embed awareness of risk and associated processes at all levels across the council. So specifically, we identify the rewrite of the documentation, the biggest change being the introduction of the strategy and guidance document, which is a practitioner's guide for those involved in the risk management process and really holds people's hands through what is required of them. We've done a piece of work with our data and insight teams developing the new service risk register template, which has got much more focus on the performance of controls that we are relying on and the management of actions that we are referencing. We adopted a test and learn approach to rolling that out, so our migration journey continues in that place. Our overarching theme is really to build a broad picture of risk assurance, utilising different sources of information that we have available to us. So some of that is the complaints information that we've just heard about. Some of that will be the internal audit findings that Martin will talk about. We also work closely with business continuity and business resilience teams and looking at what is being highlighted there, and ongoing work with the transformation team as well to link projects and programme deliverables to risk mitigation where that is what they are focused on. We've also developed some training materials, so responding to meet the needs of different audiences depending on their role within the risk management process. And we've started off some work on risk appetite, which we will continue throughout the first half of next year. So our priorities moving forward, we'll looking at undertaking a focus review or a bit of a deep dive into our red rated risks. So making sure we have real clarity on what needs to change to move those risks down from red. So this ensures that we don't keep risks at red kind of as a matter of habit, that we're used to seeing them as red rated risks. So really challenge ourselves to make sure we've got the right set of actions in place, but obviously very aware of the fact that some of those are influenced by factors that are outside of our control, and red might be the correct position for those. We're doing some work organisationally looking at horizon scanning activity. So important that upcoming changes are in view, not necessarily correct that we perceive them as risks. They could be opportunities, but we just need to make sure we're being consistent in how we're highlighting some of those items on the horizon. And we're also keen to do a piece of work on risk maturity assessment. So it's good practice to do this, identify where there are areas of weakness or where we can improve, whether that is to do with governance, to do with reporting, whether that is culture or leadership. It's a hard thing to do, and we need to make sure we do it meaningfully and not just do it because we think it's the right thing to do. So that'll be something that we'll do some thinking about towards the end of this year, and how we can do that to benefit the organisation. Thank you.
Thanks, Alice. Open up to members. Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Alice. It's a great report. It's good to see lots of activity. I suppose I just need a quick reminder from someone about the committee's responsibilities regarding risk management, because and I might have a follow-on question from that. So I don't know, Martin, so what exactly is our responsibilities? Because it feels like it ebbs and flows.
I think this is a complicated one, so bear with me. There are kind of three main bodies out there: Cabinet, Scrutiny, and Audit, or Audit Committee. So Audit Committee's job is the system of internal control and risk, right? So is the system right that risk is operating within, not the individual risks themselves. So hence the report here today has got an overview of the risks and gives you reference points to both Cabinet and Scrutiny that those risks and reports are going to those relative committees. Scrutiny is responsible for looking at the risks that the executive have assessed and checking that they are doing the things that they say they would do. So mitigations, for example, or is that high enough? Do we think that should be higher or lower, or etc. And Cabinet is responsible for managing those risks on the ground in terms of real terms. So it is a little bit complicated, but if you think of system and managing the detail and checking that they're managing the detail, so Scrutiny's job is to check that they're managing the detail, you are responsible for the system. But you can't necessarily check the system without looking at some of the detail. And that's where the complication lies. So the job isn't to check the detail, the job is to reassure you that the detail is there, that others are checking, if you like. So it's a little bit complicated, but that risk is probably the best example of those three functions, executive, scrutiny and audit, operating at a similar, on similar issues, but in slightly different responsibilities.
Just let Chris come back first.
It's the best explanation I've ever heard, but as soon as I've walked out, I'll have forgotten it. But I suppose then that the report leaves me just wondering whether whether I, as a committee member, have sufficient information in it to reach a judgment on the effectiveness of the risk management system. So I'm happy not to get embroiled in debates about whether a risk should be a 20 or a 12. Someone else does that. But I need to know how they've got there. Otherwise, it's meaningless. And I also need to know a bit about what someone's doing with those scores and the actions that flow from it to say we're managing the risk. Otherwise, so I think we've got a great process, because I've got confidence in Alice and she can articulate what's going on. I think we've got some improvement plans that will help the process get better. But it doesn't tell me enough to know whether the risk management system is working, really. That's where I am. And I kind of wonder whether Audit should have a role in it at all, or whether just leave those two other places to get on with it. And occasionally we'll pick it up through an internal audit piece that Martin...
I don't think you can abscond the responsibility.
Well, I don't want to abscond it, but I want to do it properly.
But it relies on you, I think, not trying to tell you how to do your job, but when I've done this in other places, it also relies on you going and reading those other reports to feel assurance that the process system, if you like, works for those other places as well. So does it look like they're identifying the mitigation? Is there a place, and I have to pay credit to the team for this. I think the system and the reporting, if you click on those links to scrutiny and audit, that is the best I've seen in my time in local government in terms of target risk, assessment, mitigations, dates, all that kind of stuff is in there for people to be able to analyse, debate, discuss and come to an agreement on are things moving in the right direction or not. And some of these things take a long time to move. You know, you don't just get out of financial sustainability overnight. Actually, it's quite a big ship to turn. But in terms of the debates and discussions, are they raised, are they presented, are they agreed at those respective responsibilities, either the executive or scrutiny? Probably not in the depth you might expect, because what you've also got to bear in mind is what else was on that scrutiny agenda, what else was on that cabinet agenda that they were looking at the same time. But they are reviewed with regularity, and there's a lot of information goes in there as well. The other bit that I think is the kind of second part of that, which is being developed at a greater depth, is the service risk area. Now, that's not an operational that is an operational activity and therefore isn't necessarily in the remit of this committee, but again, for me, is a building block that the committee would probably at some point, once that's been completed, say, can you bring some examples? Can you show us, or bring somebody to talk about what they've done on that, or maybe even Martin might have audited it at some point. So I do think there's a natural extension into that bit. You just have to bear in mind there's a danger of getting too operational when you're just looking at the system and control stuff.
Perhaps two things. One is, I think, if I've got to read other papers, you might as well stick them in the report, to be frank, and not give me a link, because I get paper and links don't really work on paper, do they? But so if we need the information to reach a conclusion at this committee, send us the information. It will seem to be a fairly basic requirement. The second thing is, I'll pick an example then. If the risk management system is working, because that's our test, can it be credible that a local authority of this size has got a red for budget monitoring and management? Because that seems to be such a basic housekeeping function that big organisation would have. What is it that's going wrong that we can't manage and monitor budgets properly? Because that's what it's saying, isn't it?
I don't. So again, we took the decision, and I think we took the decision, I'm looking at colleagues, not to include the reports directly, to draw a distinction between the system that you're supposed to be doing, which is what the report was about, and background reading to be able to reassure you. And we judged it as background reading to go and read those reports. That's a judgment call, and if you think we got that wrong, happy to take that lesson away. On an individual risk bit, just bear in mind you're now delving into an assessment of an individual risk. We're talking about we're not talking about the system of producing budget monitoring. We're talking about the result of the budget monitoring. So the result of the budget monitoring shows in year we're overspending. Not necessarily are we producing the reports right? Do we get it to the quarterly meeting? You know, are they discussed at the quarterly meeting? What's the process underneath that? Etc. So it's not the system that's been assessed there as a risk. It's the result of that report that generated the stuff. It's not the, and I draw a distinction between those two.
Are you happy with that, Chris? You were next, weren't you?
Yeah, just probably adding on a couple of things here. So I think, firstly, I think this is kind of what was referred to, but Alice, when you were talking about the kind of, I forget what it's called, but like the risk in that risk process, the risk assessment process, I think it would be, I know we had that last year, and when I was looking through this, I was thinking, oh, it'd be really useful to have that at the side of here so I could understand what the process actually is when I'm looking at this risk. So whether it should be an appendix or a link or just somewhere we have it, because I was thinking to myself, where do I get that from other than trying to remember which committee it was at last year? So that's one thing. I think just touching on the other point that's literally just been made, I think that it's the risk description that's a slight issue, because it's not a risk description, it's just the title or the area that the risk applies to. And so taking it to a really basic example, you know, if we go back to complaints, your risk could be risk that we get, you could have a risk that says complaints, and it could be risk that we get 1 complaint, or it could be the risk that we get 5,000 complaints to the Ombudsman and they're all upheld. So what risk is it that we're actually scoring within the, you know, what is the actual crystallisation of the risk that we're scoring? So I think we've not got enough information on that, and I appreciate that perhaps the full descriptions of these risks are like a page long or something, which is probably the problem. So I don't know if there's going to be a little bit more info. And then the other thing was just thinking about what was said about the different functions. So I guess basically we're saying that the cabinet and the service directors are the first line of defence, and the scrutiny is the second line, and you're the audit, and we're the audit function. So that makes sense to me. But I think maybe what we need, and I guess maybe we're saying that as members we should be reviewing outputs of scrutiny. I don't know, but I think I would be interested to know whether these risks were actually discussed at scrutiny and whether there was any debate on the risk, because I've not been on scrutiny for a few years, but I don't actively recall having any specific discussions on a risk and discussing how that had been scored and how the risk assessment process had been applied. But maybe I just can't remember, or things have moved on since I was there. But I think it'd be really useful to us to know, does that happen? You know, when were these last presented at a scrutiny committee, or are they only presented if the scrutiny chair asks for them to be presented? I'm not entirely sure. So sorry, that's probably not one question there, but...
So I think on that, I think the risk stuff goes to overview, doesn't it now? Because it used to go to corporate scrutiny and they moved it to overview, so I'm not sure how much attention it actually gets.
It goes to. You're right, Chair. It goes to corporate overview, and then on occasions and by request, we go along to the subgroups. So Alice has been to the subgroups and could probably tell you much more detail than me.
Yeah, I've been to certainly children's scrutiny and growth and regeneration scrutiny, and presented the kind of the relevant risks for those committees within the last 12 to 18 months, I'd say. But that was on request.
I'm just thinking that actually in this context then, it would have been useful for this meeting if the chair of scrutiny was here, because that might have been what we needed to...
He is a member of the committee, but we haven't had any apologies.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So if they were here, then that's perhaps where we could identify that, you know, we could do that piece of work.
I concur entirely with what Chris has said. I do think it's very difficult as an audit committee not to have full cognizance of the risks. I mean, most other audit committees, of which I've been a member, have been called Audit and Risk Committee for a reason. And it's fine having the system here, but actually if you're doing audit, you need to understand what the risks have been and how they're being mitigated. And so I've probably said this every year since I've been on this committee, because I think it's a failing in the system that you've described. I'm not saying that what we have is not correct within the system, because it is. But I don't think that helps audit and risk for the overview that we need to see. And we need to see more. I think if we're going to be able to do audit effectively, we need to have understood the risks more effectively, or at all really, than we do now. That's it.
So I don't dispute it is complicated. In every council I've worked, it is complicated. And it is different from other public sector bodies. It is different. I've sat on other bodies and you get everything. You get the debate on the risk and you get the risks themselves at the audit function. But local government is different to that. There is a difference between scrutiny and the responsibilities of scrutiny and the responsibilities of audit committee as well. And they are split between that. It's not for me to comment on the role of scrutiny and how effective that is. What the system relies on is that information is presented to those bodies. But I absolutely agree, for you to effectively be able to do your job here, you need to see those risks, or at least know those risks are being seen. To what extent you have to then challenge those assessments of those risks is where the difference cuts across. And that is different to other public sector bodies. I absolutely agree. But it makes that job triply hard in a local government setting.
Yeah, I agree.
And that is the system that we work in. For local government and the role of audit functions in a local government setting. So we are working with the system that we've got to work with under legislation and sit for guidance. So I hear what you're saying, but I can't change that here because we don't have authority to rewrite sit for guidance and ILACs and all, not LACs. What's the code that it goes under? Can't remember the code it goes under now, but the code it goes under, we don't have authority to change that here. But it's a complication, and I've been at other national events in previous roles when chairs of audit have raised exactly the same issue, and it's just hard. You just have to work through it to be able to help people to do the job they need, whilst at the same time trying to spell out where the boundaries sit.
Right, Kath, do you want to come back in?
No, I just think the system's rubbish.
James, do you want to come back
I
in?
was just going to quickly say, I'm not sure I 100% agree, just in the sense that I think if you're looking at risk management, the people who should have the best knowledge of the risks and how to deal with them should be the cabinet member, the service director, then overseen by the scrutiny function that has specific responsibility of looking at that directorate and area. Obviously, if we looked at one of these risks, we might have an opinion, but and it might be a bit opinion based from knowledge because we might have some involvement in that. But in reality, we're not the experts on that risk. So I think it is. I don't fundamentally see that's a wrong approach because I can see how the closer you are to the issue, in theory, you should have a better understanding and a better ability to manage that. I think what I'm picking up in this discussion is that it's just that understanding about actually how does the process work, and then from our perspective, what level of control do we want to oversee on that. So at the moment it feels a little bit like we're saying, yeah, this has a management process, but I'm not sure I feel 100% certain that I could say that if someone came to me and said, looking at the budget monitoring management risk or something, could I 100% say that process had been worked successfully? Because I haven't seen what the service director, I don't know what the cabinet member did. I don't know whether it was discussed at scrutiny, and I don't know what was said about it, and I don't know whether the risk rating's gone up or down. So I think it's that bit about how without getting into the debate of having either 2 pages on every single risk and a discussion about the specifics of the risk, how we get that level of assurance. But I think maybe what we've got isn't quite hitting that at the moment. That would be my interpretation.
So, okay, I take the point about the detail, and for future reports we'll replicate that report in the pack so that you can see that. I guess just now we've had the debate, and assuming no membership changes in the next academic year, in the next year, we just have to. There's a distinction, isn't there? And there's a danger if you get that pack, you are then checking the numbers on that pack, whereas it's the distinction that we have to try and draw to you is your job is to use that information to say, well, how have you made sure that all the strategic risks are on that list? how have you made sure not to say that that's a 20 and a verse 18? So that's the subtle difference, and I'm absolutely fine if we take the learning that we'll produce the pack in the pack, if you like, for the, doesn't matter which one because it's the same report, the cabinet meeting or whatever. There's a different subtlety of role. So yeah, we'll take that.
I just wonder whether there's an opportunity to do a one-off and just this group pick one risk, randomly, and then ask for a future meeting for the relevant people to come and talk us through the process that they go through with that, which will help us to understand that. And if we do it randomly, you're not picking one that's particularly the best or the worst, and we're not picking one that we know that's going to be
I'd probably
well
recommend one green, one red, one amber.
And just so we get people to come and talk to us at a future meeting about those individual risks, to give us some confidence that those processes and that detail is there. James, do you?
I agree with that, and I was just going to say, I think, in my opinion, that also needs to be the chair of the group overview scrutiny management or the panel members, because we can have a director or a cabinet member who comes and says, "Oh, I'm doing this," but actually we're saying here we've got a function that's managing the risk of that overview and scrutiny, and I think we do need to also delve into whether they understand it as well.
We need both.
Yeah, both. That's what I'm saying.
Both levels.
I think what I don't want us to do is just have a director of a service director come and then not have that a second.
So rather than extend the discussion, I think we'll capture that as an action, and I'll work with Steve.
Just be
to work
mindful
it out.
it's nobody's job to tell scrutiny what they should be scrutinising. But so
Chris?
I'd probably go with your director bit and then feed it the other way.
So a couple of things. I think one of the things the Audit Committee could usefully use this report for is to have a debate with Martin about how he prioritises his audit resource, because what this says is there's some areas that... So I think it's got a role for the Audit Committee, even in this format, which is we take it as read. Have we got in our audit plan all these high-risk areas covered adequately? And I think when we've had previous debates, we know we haven't. So we had a debate about capital programme, and we said we wouldn't put it on the agenda, but it's flashing red here. So maybe as an Audit Committee, we should put it back on the programme. So I think it's got... it can help us as well. It's not just about us approving it. The second thing, in my first year on this committee, the chair of Overview and Scrutiny was a regular attendee. It helped considerably in this discussion. I don't know who the current chair is, but I haven't seen one here for a while. I think they are
I don't think he's actually been able to attend any of them so far.
But it hasn't happened
But
for
we
a while.
need,
But I think,
we
I think
perhaps need to pick that up with him.
that's a link that's useful, I think, in this discussion.
We are required to note this report. Are we content with noting it after that? Actually, there's one more comment. Sorry, there was one more comment from me. Just to say, Alice, I love the fact that we're working on a risk appetite statement, because my observation, dealing with different services across the council, is it's very varied how they view risk, and I know of some areas that see risk as something to be avoided, and therefore they will put in place policies and processes which are ludicrous and have huge impacts on residents, just to avoid accepting that something has an element of risk associated with it. So that risk appetite and embedding that across the organisation is critical to help us deliver on what we talked about earlier about complaints and customer standards, all of that, about how we treat customers and treat residents. So yeah, I really welcome that. But no need to comment on it, because we do need to move on. But thank you. Next, hopefully this is a short one. We did note that report, didn't we? Yes. So the next one is on our request, actually, for an additional meeting of the council. And I'm not sure, Lee, are you doing this one?
Thanks, Chair. Lee Webb, Head of Governance. I'm here with this short report based on the discussion that took place at the last committee meeting. Obviously, at that meeting, you had in front of you the dates for 25-26 council meetings, and it was mentioned, obviously, that some members had concerns that there was no meeting kind of between February and July due to the budget meeting being March, and obviously we're getting into pre-election period. So there was a discussion about this year's, and this report is based on, obviously last year it was you approved the dates for 24-25, which at the time, although there was still the opportunity, because obviously we haven't got elections, there is a gap and the possibility for an April meeting. It wasn't included in last year's dates. I think the discussion at this committee was that they thought it would be helpful to have an April meeting while we can. So we've been away, and the report basically advises and proposes a date of the 23rd of April for additional meeting. In terms of process, if this committee is happy with that, it would go on to council and it would be approved at the budget council meeting, hopefully, and we'd then have a meeting in April. It does still leave us needing to approve 25-26 dates, and that is in hand at the moment, and we'll be coming back to a future meeting of this committee. Again, taking on board the views of the committee about the gaps and how we spread the meeting. So that will come to probably your next or April meeting.
So I think it says in the report March, but I think it's probably April.
I think
just
it's
for
likely to be
members.
April.
It does actually say in March, and so the dates for the next municipal year will come to our April meeting, and then we'll go to the AGM to be approved, which is a bit later than we normally do it, but that's because we've kicked up a fuss and asked them to change them. But just thank you for that, Lee. And hopefully there aren't many comments on it. I mean, I think we're happy with that date, but are we just happy to approve it?
I'm very happy. I will repeat, we need a meeting, ordinary meeting of council between the February one and the July one. I don't think it's acceptable that there isn't one. I'll just leave it like that, and I shall expect to see one in the next year's.
You can be reassured I'm working on it. But I think
that's a quick question, Chair. Sorry, Councillor Pinnock. Did I hear you say a meeting between February and July?
An ordinary meeting of council between.
Cool. And then one other question for the April meeting. We have two types of council meeting. Yeah. One is holding exec to account. One is key discussion. Now, you don't have to decide what type of meeting that is. Full council could decide that at the budget meeting, and we could take that to group leaders for them to decide and recommend. But those are the two options. I'm not sure this committee has to decide which one it is, Lee.
It doesn't have to decide, but obviously of the two types of meetings, we've kind of met the threshold for both meetings within this year, so it is open to members, well, for full council to agree whether you want to put a recommendation forward around that. It's you can do, but it'll be a council decision.
And so the key discussion would be agreed through group leaders. So it wouldn't be the administration that set the key discussion, it would be group leaders together. So is the committee saying they don't have a particular view either way, whether it's holding executive to account or key discussion? I mean, if I was forced to pick, I'd say holding executive to account, but it's up to members. I think we'll take that as there wasn't a decision by this committee, and we'll just note the report, and we'll work on what that is with group leaders, I guess. Thanks, Lee. We did just need to note it, didn't we? Yep.
Refer to council.
Yeah,
And
we're
note
actually
it and refer it to council.
We're referring it on to council, yeah.
Right, we are on to agenda item 10, which is the Corporate Code of Governance. Sam.
Okay, thank you. My name's Samantha Lawton and I'm the Service Director for Legal Governance and Commissioning. So this report sets out the review of the Kirklees Code of Corporate Governance. We review it periodically. It was last reviewed, it's last been reviewed in 2017 and 2020, so it's been a little while. When we do review it, we look at the SIP for Solace guidance, and that defines the principles that should underpin the governance of a local authority, and it provides a structure to help an authority with their approach to governance. So the guidance sets out the current principles, and we've checked it against the guidance, and there are no detailed amendments. It still reflects it accurately. The guidance hasn't been updated since 2016, so all local authorities work with that guidance. However, we did want to refresh it slightly because it's been in this format for some years. And we thought we could be more helpful, and on reflection, it would be helpful to actually be clear on each principle and explain how each principle is achieved, and then what documents we rely on to demonstrate compliance with the code, so you can follow it through as anyone looking at the principles. Because before that, we just had principles and sub-principles that didn't go very far. So we've made some amendments that we thought are helpful. That thought add a little bit further clarification in terms of the code, and has just refreshed it. We did look at what others do, and it's actually quite varied across the piece in terms of local authorities. Some are very limited documents; they have 1 or 2 pages. Some are quite lengthy, and I think we probably fall somewhere in the middle. Ours was probably quite limited before, but we've added a little bit more to it. So the report's here for approval. The amendments are the areas in red. And so, yeah, let me know if you've got any questions.
Sam, I'm going to open that to the committee.
Oh, the beginning and the end, I think, is in black.
If we're going to talk, put your mics on. So, what I'd like to say is I'd like to thank you for this, because I think that format of this is a principle, this is what we do, and this is how we can evidence that, I think is much clearer, much clearer. I'm sure there's work to do over time to
finesse it, maybe.
Yeah. And some of these will be working well. Some of them may be areas where we, either us or audit or scrutiny, have observed that some of that evidence perhaps isn't where you'd want it to be.
Yeah.
But this is a statement of what good would look like, really, isn't it? Rather than a statement of where we are at the moment, isn't it? So this is the principle that's worked to us. I welcome it. I think it's a really, really nice piece of work.
Thank you.
So thank you for you and the team that pulled this together. Comments?
It is much better. So it's a good way to easily see what we're trying to achieve as a council in terms of the principles. So I applaud you for that, because that's not an easy task. Of course, in the end, it's whether or not it works. And how do we judge? I guess through complaints, customer standards,
performance data.
Performance data. So, yeah.
The audit reports.
Yeah. So, I wonder whether we ever ask members what their views of council governance is. Because one of my worries is that the very tiers of councillors, aren't they? Cabinet, very involved scrutiny, and everybody else. And everybody else seems to be increasingly remote from what is going on in the council. And I think that should be a cause for concern. So I don't know how you address that, but this at least might be something where we can say, where it says on the transparency stuff, does that work for you? Openness and engagement, does that work? But I am concerned about not just this council, all councils are, I think, members who aren't in senior positions will become less engaged.
So, if I can just add to that before we ask Sam to respond, I think this would be very useful as forming part of induction to help new councillors try and get that understanding of how because when you join the council, I remember when I joined it, it's all, it's a bit of a blur because you've just been elected, but also you don't really understand it, do you? You sit there for the first year going, I really haven't got a clue how this all works. But I think Yeah, so if you wouldn't mind taking that on board, perhaps, Sam, as a thought.
Absolutely. And it's a piece of work that we're doing at the moment, and in response to the peer review as well, is to look at and refresh the councillor induction, particularly for the big bang of 26, and look at how we do that when we'll have all councillors coming back. So we'll definitely take it on board. I think you're right. I think it is a useful tool to use in induction, but we are looking at the council induction refresh, and I'm also looking at member development and what that strategy or that framework looks like as well, and whether that's something we need to relook at as well.
Kath, if you want to come back, or then I'll move to James. Okay, James.
Yeah, just quickly, sort of on that point, it was just when I was looking through where it says this is evidenced by it. Now, I appreciate some of that might be things that are confidential, and there's a range of things, but some of like the strategies and stuff like that, thinking about members or members of the public, I'm not sure where they are. As in, how do you access them? Are they on the website? And I think that's one of the problems we have, is that if I want the environment strategy, which I have at times to time going, what's in our environment strategy? You know, when we talk about, should we reduce size of bins, or what does it actually say in our environment strategy?
Yeah, they're all on the website.
And where do you find it? I'm sure they're on the website, but some can be quite difficult to find.
Okay.
So, and I know we're aware of that, and we're trying to make it more intuitive and stuff, but I think that would be useful, like, for members.
To have links to the documents.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the internet site and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah, we did debate that, didn't we? About putting links in. It's just having to keep it, well, it'll be fine, but we just have to keep it updated, because things move on the internet and they get updated and come off and so on. But no, that's fine. We can add in the links to those documents so they're easily accessible.
Yeah, I'm thinking, even if I don't know whether it needs to be in there, but if there's a place on our website which is, you know,
Or we can say within the document you can find them here, or something like that, where it's easy to find.
So like,
yeah.
I don't know how it works today, but let's say you've got all of your strategies. Are all your strategies in one place?
No.
Or are they under each?
No.
I think that's the problem, isn't it? There's probably not an A to Z that says list of strategies, and you just easily click
Okay.
the right one. They're probably they're there, but they're not necessarily easy to find if you're only looking for them once a year or something like that.
No, I'll take that away, Councillor Homewood.
Thanks, James. Any more? Are we content to, what am I supposed to do? Recommend this item to full council? Yep. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I didn't.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a short report. As I said, this report's here for noting by the committee. It is a bit later than usual, and it basically just sets out the appointments to all the outside bodies that we appoint to in Kirklees. It would normally have come earlier in the year. There were numerous changes for various reasons, so it was a case of trying to pick the right point when we knew who was going to be on what. As I say, we had changes of leadership, changes in cabinet, movement between groups that affected some of the proportions, so it is later than usual, but it's just here for noting. Going forward, we would hope to have the next report with you in either July or September of next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. And I don't members have any comments, or will just consent to note this report? Yeah.
Ask where it's published. Is it on the website, this list?
There is a list of outside bodies on the website, yeah. So
with their members?
It's actually by individual body on the main sort of the wicker outside bodies. The smaller outside bodies are not published, but under each councillor's name, it would have which body they're appointed to. So
The reason, it links back to the last item, actually, because some of these committees, where there's a councillor rep, are relatively important, and if somebody wanted to lobby them, then how do they find out who is, apart from going through every single councillor?
they could approach the governance team. Obviously, we hold all the information. It's listed under each individual member. Not all bodies are on the website. As I say, this report is on the website, so in effect, we could point someone to this that's got the list of all the outside bodies.
I think that's if we're into the openness, which is, I'm a great support of what the last document said, then members who are representing the council on these external bodies, it ought to be easier to find out. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I take the point. I mean, it's a balance, obviously. Like you say, we would list them under the member and their responsibility and where they sit. In terms of listing everybody, when you look at the council website, you'll see the main committees of this council and the main Wicker committees listed. Things like, just for example, Walker and Greenwood Educational Charity, some of the smaller outside bodies, we don't list them specifically. As I say, this report's published online, so the full list is there.
Yeah.
Could I make a suggestion? So the council does have a transparency page. Why don't we just put a link to this report on the transparency page?
Thank you. So are we content to note the report? Okay. And with perfect timing, we have Terence joining us to talk about cybersecurity. I've already mentioned that if members have questions that may be something that we don't feel appropriate to share in public, we will just hold those questions over to later in the meeting where we have a private session anyway. But over to you, Terence.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting me. So this is a report that I've written to be in public, which responds to a previous request about providing assurance around our cybersecurity controls. Okay. Oh, sorry. My name's Terence Hudson. I am Head of Technology here at Kirklees Council. Apologies for that. So, in terms of what we do today, we connect to what's called a public sector network. And as part of the process to connect to that public sector network, we undertake a test on an annual basis that tests our security posture. And the outcome of that test has a list of remediations that we need to undertake. We undertake those remediations and we gain assurance. That is done by an external tester, so it is effectively an external audit of our technical controls. Okay. We also undertake an internal process to connect to health networks, so to the NHS. That's called the DSPT, and that is an internally audited process. That process accepts what we do for the public sector network, and then we build on it around people and process. It's the people and process elements that are internally audited because the technical components are already audited by an external third party. What's happening now in the nation, in our sector, is that we have another thing called the Cyber Assessment Framework. That's defined by the National Cyber Security Centre that we report into on a regular basis. And that's has been previously aimed at providers of critical national infrastructure, so your energy providers, so on, and for network information services. So that's for people who provide the internet, but also it's actually aimed at NHS trusts and, as of last year, the ICB. So we are working towards adopting the Cyber Assessment Framework. That work started last year, it is underway, and each period we have to meet targets, and then we work with people from the MHCLG, and we get assessed on that progress. It's going to be a lengthy process because we're just starting out with 3 main systems that the council have. So that's finance, social care and revenues and benefits. So we're working on that premise and building out from that. And I suppose all I'm here to say is that that process should provide you with the assurance that you need. I'm open to questions, obviously. Chair.
Thanks, Terence. I'll open it to members if they have any questions.
I suppose it's not a question. I think the report's a really good descriptor of the processes by which the council gains assurance on its cyber security, and I guess it's done in that way for a particular reason. You're not going to share all the the gory detail in a public report. So it does do that, because I've come across some of these assessment frameworks in previous roles, and they are effective, also very kind of governance heavy. But some of the cybersecurity comes from real practical stuff. So I'm just not sure when, if, how the committee might receive a second report that addresses some of the practical stuff that we can see in private or whatever, in a way that's meaningful for non-experts. Because I think this is great, but it's describing a process, and I take the assurance from the process we're engaged in. It is in depth, I get that. But I just feel somewhere there might be a time and a place for a bit more of the detail of what's actually happening within the council, and particularly on the people side, because a lot of cyber comes from people things as well as technology, doesn't it? And I guess why you can't share that in this setting, but it'd be useful to agree a time frame and a process to get some of that detail at some point.
Terence?
I'm fine with that. I've got no problem with that. That makes sense. Obviously, that would be heard in private, because people do watch what we say.
So, okay, so if the committee are comfortable with that, what I'll do is I'll work with Terence to find an appropriate slot on our future agendas to bring something forward that works for him as well. And we'll capture that on the tracker. But have anyone any other questions that they... James?
Yeah, and sorry if this isn't, I don't know if this is entirely relevant to this, but just thinking about how we manage security and things, obviously in my mind I'm thinking that the council has lots of information and data and so on on people with varying degrees of confidentiality or risk attached to that. So if you're, you mentioned some of the systems that we utilise, and they sounded like they're sort of local government, broad local government type systems and applications that we use. I'm just thinking in my head, like if I was somebody who worked in children's services or something, and I decided that I wanted to take a lot of historic paper files and put them onto a internal system, what process do I go through to do that? How do I know that I'm putting them somewhere that's secure or not? Is there like a security policy that I've got to follow?
We have internal controls, which I'll not go into the detail of, to make sure that data is secure, it's at rest and in transit. So we care a lot about, obviously, what's on our network. We care a lot about what we store in cloud services. But obviously what we also care about is how information transits from inside the council to service providers, as a for example. And obviously within the council we have policies, IG policies in particular, around how we handle data. So that would probably be a bit of a hybrid report in terms of the technology aspect, but also the information governance aspect around how we actually physically handle information between internal departments, locations and so on. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I was just thinking in my head that you've got the cybersecurity, so how do we put in place those cybersecurity preventions on applications and systems or whatever it is that we utilise, but then there's that thing of like, how do we know how do we know within our organisation that people utilise the right thing, apply those policies. So I guess it's what you're saying is other policies that apply and processes that apply to the outside of what you're here to present, which is the cybersecurity assurance.
There are two parts to that answer. For the technical part, we actually work with the National Cybersecurity Centre at a regional level. So there's an organisation called WARP that we all attend, and we have a set of standards around how we keep information secure. And any new system that we procure has to meet those standards. And that's really important around how we handle data, particularly when it's outside our control, i.e. in the cloud. Okay, so that's a really important distinction. So we do that. But again, I'll go back to in terms of handling information assets, whether they are bits of paper or whatever in that supply chain, we have policies inside the council around how we manage that as well. So every system that we have, especially new systems, we go through a data protection impact assessment, and it's all quite rigorously done. It's the only way I can assure you in this room.
I can bring Andy in, because You need to introduce.
Hello, yeah. I'm Andy Simcox, Service Director for Strategy and Innovation. Terence is part of my leadership team, so that's why I'm here. There's a couple of points, I think. So one is, at a basic level, clearly what people can access when they log in is tightly controlled. And I won't go further than that, but that you know, what you're able to see and use is managed right from the start in that respect. And then there are the HR policies or standard policies, such as personal use of electronic equipment policy that's been in place in the council for a long time, that guides staff on the do's and don'ts, which is behavioural really as much as anything else.
James, any more? No? You're happy? I'm looking at everybody. I'm not seeing any more questions. I think we're asking that this report be noted. Are we content to note the report? Thank you very much. Thanks, Terence and Andy.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, everyone, again. So this is the third quarter report of internal audit for our activities in the year 24-25. And we have carried out a number of pieces of work for which the descriptions are contained within the detailed paper that is attached, and with a small amount of additional information contained in the private appendix, which we'll discuss in a minute or two. A little bit more information to let you know, as pointed out within the principal report, which is that the Global Internal Audit Standards technically took effect from the 1st of January 2025, but the UK government determined that for UK public bodies, the international internal audit global standards do not take effect until April 2025, aligning with our financial year. So I am in the process of drafting out a charter document and a strategy document, which I will ask you to consider at a meeting very early in the new year, where we will also discuss the audit plan proposed for 25-26. So that is what I want to draw to your attention, and then beyond that, what you also have this period is an additional report that provides more detail about the progress of implementation of matters raised in the internal audit reports of 23-24. So things that should have been implemented by the 30th of September 2024. So what we have identified, which is contained in the additional appendix, is that 91% of the fundamental recommendations have been implemented, and the others are in progress. There are only about 11 of those, which is why it's 91%. It's 10 out of 11. And then rather fewer significant recommendations have been implemented, about 60% of them, with partial implementation, not implantation, as is put in the report, of 40%, and no action on a tiny, small number. Additionally, what we will be doing is reporting that to you quarterly hereafter, where we'll be telling you about the progress, essentially, for the work up to 6 months to go. So quarter after the quarter, about how much progress we've made. So to try to bring that into focus for management, because following discussion with the Chief Exec and Executive Leadership Team, they feel that it's very important that a bit more management effort is put into implementing internal recommendations, for the obvious reason that they've made to try to improve the systems and governance arrangements of the organisation. So that's the sort of headline overview material. The progress on the internal audit work is shown in the detailed report. We've got reports on things you can see: bank rec, direct payments, agency labour, backs, fuel, domestic abuse, a selection of things. We have more limited assurance reports than we used to have, because we actually do less work in the areas that always used to score relatively well, like schools. So what we have is a slightly more comprehensive report, and we've spent a little bit more time this time recognising the things that you've asked for over the previous couple of meetings. So we have put more details of what the background to the audit is, the number of recommendations that we've made, etc., etc. So I'll leave it to that, Chair. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Martin. I'll open it to members.
Firstly, I like the extra detail in the report. I think putting the context of scale makes it a lot easier to make sense of it. So thank you for that. If I looked at the direct payments report, the one that's got limited assurance, I was just wondering what the residual risk is. Is it that we might be paying for things that don't need to be paid for, or that people who should be getting payments aren't getting them on a timely basis and therefore not getting the services they need? I couldn't quite work out what was limited. So what is the kind of residual risk that we need to be worried about on that? And I just wonder if you could say a bit more about the increase in scale and complexity of fraud cases you refer to in the report, and whether there's some particular environmental driver behind that that is a risk that the council could manage, or if it's things that's just outside our control. Obviously, we're picking the frauds up, but is there something preventative we could be doing?
So on the direct payments, I think the residual risk is essentially that money is not being spent in the way that it's meant to be, which is not necessarily absolutely always fraudulently. It might be just that people are not spending it. So there isn't any sort of monitoring, or there isn't enough active monitoring of the money that is handed over. So it's all of it theoretical, because the council calculates what it thinks it would have spent if the person had received direct support by the council, by home care and whatever, and then it then says to somebody, would you like that as money instead? And then there is a sort of care plan or an activity plan agreed with that person. They employ their own people, or they do what they want with the money, pay for various kinds of sort of daycare and things. And not everyone spends the money as had been planned, and just occasionally we discover that it has been misused. But in lots of instances, it's just that it's not being spent, and then it's, is the person really, are they using the money in the best way? So it's about proactivity, about the use of the funding. As regards fraud, I think it's always hard to know how much you should. If you go looking, you will find some. The number of right to buy applications has risen because of the government changing or indicating they're going to change the rules, but they haven't necessarily got to the stage yet where because they were only sort of they've been pre-sifted so far. In various other areas, I think we're trying a bit harder, and our colleagues in housing are also trying a bit harder with issues about tenancy-related frauds, which have not necessarily been picked up in the past. So it is people not living in the property and then letting it to someone else, for example. And I think it's important that, given the council's problems with homelessness, that if properties are being misused in that way, that we take steps to try to get them back for the use with the priority clients who need them. So, and I think that is down to our colleagues in housing as well, being more proactive in those areas. Other areas, I think things like money laundering, we're just becoming more aware of risks in those areas, about things like people overpaying their council tax or rent accounts and then asking for refunds. And the reason why it's money laundering is because effectively they can then show to another party that they've allegedly received money from Kirklees Council. Now, we don't take cash ourselves anymore, but some bodies that do or might do will be sometimes caught within a regime that may or may not be party to it, because the government's advice is that accepting a sum of cash above 10,000 euros, £8,000, you've got to be aware of why you're doing it. But if someone repeatedly goes into random post offices and pays £4,000 on a council tax bill that they're not to know that the council tax bill, what the council tax bill value is, and then they come back later and say, "Oh, I've seemed to have overpaid my bill by £10,000 or whatever. Please, can I have my money back?" And then what it appears in their bank account then as Kirklees Council credit or whatever, or cheque from Kirklees Council. So I think we're becoming more aware of that. There aren't huge numbers, but there is a little bit of that. There's a little bit of people abusing the direct debit code. And having paid council tax, say, for 6 quarters, coming back and saying, "Oh, I think under the direct debit code, I don't want you to take my money anymore. I want it back." And we haven't necessarily been always saying, "No, we dispute the person's attempt to have the refunds done."
in a proactive way. So it's those type of things that I think we're just getting more active in, really. So rather than perhaps pursuing areas such as blue badges, which have been one of the areas of interest, and I know is important with a view to being sure that people don't abuse those. In terms of fraud, there are potentially, and I use the word potentially because not everything, things can look worse than they really are, but there are a number of areas that do need a bit more work. So I think that's the answer to your question, Chris, really, if that's all right.
Come in.
Just a quick one. So on the one related to domestic abuse, it's got a limited assurance. Yes. When it says it says fundamental recommendations relate to contract management and data processing, and I was just, and you might not be able to say anything about it right now, but on where it says data processing, my thoughts were just, well, what does that mean? Because obviously domestic abuse can be a life or death matter. Does that mean that people are giving us their information? For example, they may have left, they may be in danger, and they may have gone somewhere else. Does that mean that that's in danger of being lost or provided to the wrong people, or am I going down the wrong track on that? Because that just seems very, very concerning, that if there is this fundamental issue there with the way they were managing information that people give to us about such a confidential matter, that could be pretty significant.
Yes, I think it's perhaps we won't. It's best we don't discuss the detail of it. But on the other hand, we just need to be sure that we are making sure that the customer's data is protected. That isn't to say that it's been misused. It's sometimes about the systems and arrangements that pertain that could mean that there is a risk there. So it's about not being as secure as it could be rather than.